But I tell you, the toughest transition was going from lieutenant colonel, which was probably about the 16-year mark, to that 20-year point when I became a colonel. And I got promoted 2 years early, 2 years ahead of my peers to colonel, which, again, I wasn't expecting. I mean, I was awestruck by that. But you do tend to go, am I ready to be a deputy commander of an Air Force base or a commander of an Air Force base or lead at that level? Because I used to think back to when I was a lieutenant, well, those colonels were either really old men and women who looked gruff and, they didn't look anything like me. I have a baby face still, and now I'm about to become this colonel. It's a little intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be lying if I didn't say a little imposter syndrome does kind of flow in a little bit.
What if you could take a life-threatening diagnosis and make it into your best leadership lesson that you've ever had? Well, you're about to meet someone for whom that is absolutely true. Welcome to the Dov Baron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I advise high-performing leaders and organizations in how to harness their emotional source code to purposefully transform their tribe. Today on the Dov Baron Show, you've heard the hype. Be present, be bold, be innovative. But what happens when the real battlefield isn't in the boardroom, it's literally inside of your own skull? Our guest for the next 2 episodes isn't just a retired colonel. He's a former U.S. Air Force commander who led 33,000 troops across the globe. But his true leadership battle didn't begin until doctors dropped 5 words on him. 5 words that changed his life forever. You have a brain tumor. More on that in a moment. You are tuned into the Dov Baron Show. This isn't just another podcast. It's an exploration into the minds of those who are shaping the world. Every episode is a raw, unscripted collaboration between my guests and me as we dive into the truths that few dare to ask. We find guests for you who are often unknown to the general public, but absolute titans in their field. The kinds of people that high-profile leaders turn to when they need an edge. If you're the kind of leader who craves depth over sound bites, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is where real thinkers come to sharpen their edge. For the next 2 episodes, we're joined by retired Air Force Commander Scot Heathman. He went from combat pilot to cancer patient. This is a story of how one man turned a life-threatening diagnosis into a radically human leadership revolution. He's not just here to sell you some inspiration. He's here to elevate you beyond adversity. He's got the scars to prove it. Scot is also the founder, owner of Elevate Others, a business designed to accelerate your development, to elevate your impact. And when it comes to personal development and growth in human performance, this man is at the top of the game. This is not your average military to mindfulness story. This is a command with courage. It just might change the way that you lead, the way you live, and the way you aim. So strap yourself in, turn up the volume, and help me to welcome retired U.S. Air Force Colonel and pilot with over 25 years of leadership, my mate, Commander Scot Heathman. Scot, good to have you here, mate.
Oh, it's so good to see you, Dov.
It's been a long time. I sent you that picture the other night. Like 7 years since I was speaking at then your command.
Yeah. It's funny because I got the same photo and other speakers there. But yeah, that was 2018 when you came out for that event. And boy, did we have a good time.
Yeah, that was really good. Really excellent. I really enjoyed that. And it was refreshing to me, as I think I told you, because I know I had a relationship with you for a couple of years beforehand, but I had my own biases. And I always say I love it when people break my biases. But the biases that was broken about my ideas of what a military environment was like under your command, of course. I'm not saying that's how military is, but under your command, it was completely different than I expected. And that was really wonderful. I want to talk about that. I want to talk, obviously, about you as a commander. I want to talk about your diagnosis. I want to talk about your book and the series of books that you're doing. But let's start by going a little bit back in time, because you're a commander in the Air Force. Talk to us about that dream, because for anybody who's watching this on video, you may see behind Scot's head, there are certain symbolisms like Tatooine and certain symbolisms of the Empire And by that, we're not talking about the empire that Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump or one of the others might want to run, but the actual empire from Star Wars. Talk to us about your original dream that got you onto this pathway.
Yeah. I can't say I blame George Lucas. I should be honoring him because in May 25th, 1977, and we are approaching that May the 4th day.
May the 4th be with you.
But it really was. It was Star Wars when I saw that movie and I was barely 3. And I was like, oh my gosh, it just blew my mind. I thought it was real. I just wanted to do what those pilots were doing, the Han Solos and Luke flying the X-Wing. And I'm like, how do you do that? And I kind of chased that dream. But funny enough, if I even back myself up to birth, I was born on an Air Force base. And it was Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska. My father was finishing up his 4-year enlistment. And I think there's probably something in the water. I guarantee you there was something there. But that is the dream of flying or finding a career in aviation. That's what I knew I wanted to do. And, that's hard when I speak to kids these days. Like, they don't all know what they want to do, but it was crystal clear to me.
So this little kid watching Star Wars, you wanted to fly, but the path wasn't smooth.
No.
You and I had talked about that. I know lots of pilots, military pilots, and, they've all had their own challenges for whatever the reasons are, but yours is quite unique.
Yeah, for one, just my family upbringing, we didn't have a lot of money, and it wasn't like I was going to go get flying lessons tomorrow. And it's just something we just didn't have a lot of ability to do. So I got an opportunity once or twice to go up in an airplane, like a Cessna, little 152. But other than that, I had zero flying experience. But I said, well, there's got to be a way to get to this point. And so I said, well, the best way to help me pay for college or try to get into that career would probably be to join the military. And I will say, too, I did want to serve my country. That was a big calling to me as well. And I said, you know what, let's see if I can get these two worlds to align, and applied for an Air Force scholarship through ROTC. And that's what I ended up going forward with into college when I went off to school at Illinois Tech in Chicago. Okay, I get to college. Now it's about graduating college. And I was a civil engineer, so I didn't exactly pick the easiest degree, but an engineering degree I thought would give me a leg up as far as competing for a pilot training slot. And in my junior year, when I finally got that nod that, yeah, you've been selected for a pilot training slot, I thought, okay, that's it, I'm going. Well, little did I know you have to go through a flight physical. And there's all kinds of things that flight doctors find in candidates when they're going through their flight physical, things that we didn't even know about our own bodies, like heart murmurs or potential issues with your eyes, or maybe there are some hearing, whatever it may be. They're probing everything. And I thought I went through pretty smoothly. Things were looking pretty good. At least I would go in these rooms with 10 people and 2 people wouldn't come back, but I was still there. So I figured, all right, I'll probably make it through. But little did I know I actually failed my flight physical. And for about 6 months, I didn't know why. I think the bureaucratic process of getting answers, it took us a long time to figure out why.
So they don't tell you, they just tell you you failed?
It was exactly like you'd see in the movies, like that big red stamp that says fail, and it's in a packet, and you get this back and says sorry.
But no explanation as to why?
Nope, it was just fail.
Would it be normal to just accept that and just go, okay, that's it, I'm out?
I think for a lot of people, yeah.
So what happened for you?
Well, we decided to push it and say, let's get some answers and see if we can get somebody to talk with us. And like I said, it took months to get answers. What it ended up being in the end was I was actually too short. I was 5'6" at the time, but here's where the information was wrong. They had actually took measurements when I first got into college, and at that time I was about 5'1". So I had my biggest growth spurt in college, and they used some of that old information and transposed it onto my new documentation. So it looked like I hadn't grown. And the area where I was too short was my sitting height. It wasn't necessarily my standing height, but you got to be tall enough sitting, I guess, to see over the dashboard, something like that.
I'm just imagining this, it's like peeking over.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the killjoy thing, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, it was too short. And there were minimums. You had to be 33 inches to be a navigator and 34 for pilot. And I was right at 33. So I ended up getting a navigator slot instead. But I said, that's not good enough for me. I wanted to be a pilot.
Right.
And so I pressed my commander and he said, you know what? Let's go through the waiver process. Let's see if they'll accept you getting remeasured and we'll see what happens. Well, I had to go find my own doctor to get remeasured. And I ended up finding this Navy flight surgeon at Great Lakes Naval Air Station just north of Chicago. I had to drive there in the middle of the night because he was working on a night shift. And I had to basically show up and get remeasured. And you sit in this chair and there's a ruler behind you, so I'm sitting up as straight as I can be. And my friend let me lay down in the back seat so gravity wasn't pulling on me this way. It was hilarious. And the doctor asked me, he's like, how tall do you need to be? And I said, 34 inches. And he goes, well, you better squeeze your butt cheeks. So I'm like trying to do this. And in the end, he goes, 34 and a half. And he goes, I'll put this in the paperwork. We'll get it sent off. And about a week before I graduated college, I found out that I was cleared and I'm going off to pilot training.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So how old were you at that point?
At that point, I was about 22.
Oh, wow.
So
young.
22 years old, entering pilot training. Yep.
That's amazing. So what is your strongest memory of those very early days in pilot training? Because I'm thinking about this kid watching Star Wars and seeing the X-Wings and then suddenly being in that seat.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what that would be like for you.
I tell you, pilot training is like the best year of your life and the worst year because it's like going to driver's training every day and getting tested every single day. So it's a lot of high stress, but you're with a class of about 30 people. So you've got great teammates around you and you're all pushing for each other to do well. But it's still stressful. To me, it was just incredible, like that I get to get up in an airplane, put on a parachute and a helmet, and get in this little trainer and go up and do aerobatics or go fly low-level missions. We're flying 300 feet off the ground. And it was just incredible. I almost couldn't get enough of it. I could deal without all the examinations, though, every single day in pilot training, but it was a great year. It was a hard year, though, because, again, you're constantly being tested. You're constantly being pushed to see, can you learn these skills quickly? You're learning to fly in instrument weather conditions. You're learning to fly at night. You're learning to fly aerobatics, formation, low levels. And then we're also learning how to fly different tactics as far as the aircraft. And then about halfway through our training, we have to decide, do we want to go to fighter training? Do we want to go to bomber training? Or do we want to go to like cargo airlift or air refueling? That to me was the hardest decision. And I kind of went deep inside me and said, everybody wants to be an F-15 pilot. They all want to come in and be fighter pilots. But it kind of changed for me about halfway through. And I said, I think I want to be with a crew. Like I really love being around other people. And I think flying with a crew would be great. And so I went towards the heavy track, they call it. And there we fly like a business jet, a 6-passenger business jet, to give you that little heavier aircraft feel than the small little 2-seater that we were flying before. I fell in love with it. I was like, you know what? This is a way for me to not only accomplish my dream, but to get to see the world. And after you graduate and get those wings, it's the happiest day of your life, but it's a short celebration because next thing you know, you're at your next base and you're learning how to fly a completely different aircraft. So that would have been my third aircraft, which was the KC-135, which is an air refueler. So think of it as a gas can in the sky where airplanes come behind us and get fuel. You learn how to fly that airplane for 3-4 months.
Isn't that a large plane?
Yeah, it's about the size of a 737.
Yeah, I think I've been in one.
You were when you were at Fairchild. Yes.
I was in that one. I was like, this thing is enormous. I was really quite shocked. It was huge.
Yeah. And that's one of the smaller, I'll say, of the heavier mobility aircraft. I mean, the B-17 C-5 are way bigger.
But I'm thinking about you flying these fighter planes, learning to fly in a 2-seater, and then flying that. That's like driving a Mini and then driving a truck. even at a simple level, it's disorienting. Like I know when I got my car was much bigger than the car my wife had before. It took me a couple of weeks on the road to sort of have the sense of where the space was. You know what I mean? So I can't imagine what it's like in a plane, because that would be massively different.
Yeah, just taxiing the airplane is a chore because, again, you can barely see the tips of the wings. You're looking out the window trying to make sure you're not going to hit a fence line or another airplane. I mean, the last thing you want to have is a taxi accident. That's not cool for any pilot.
You crashed? How fast were you? How high were you? I was on the ground.
I was on the ground. Yeah, you don't ever want to face anybody with that kind of thing on your record. But the one thing that is tough is gauging, you're 20 feet in the air. You're not like 2 or 3 feet off the ground like you would be in a small aircraft. So you got to figure out, okay, where am I sitting height-wise in relation to the taxiway? And oh, by the way, the front nose gear is like 5 to 7 feet behind me. So just learning all of the dimensions and how you taxi that airplane around is, like I said, is a major chore in itself. But I tell you what, once you learn one airplane and learn how to study and learn how to get really good at learning that particular aircraft, you kind of understand how to study any aircraft.
Right.
Because the owner's manuals are constructed the same ways. You always know chapter 3 are emergency procedures. So you always go to chapter 3 for these issues. So you get to learn real quick. Hey, I can learn pretty much any airplane. And I even had to, at about 5 years into my career, I switched from the 135 to the C-17, which is a cargo plane. Completely different system sets. It's probably 50 years newer than the KC-135 you were sitting in. Completely different, but it flies roughly the same once you get up and get airborne.
Wow. So you've gone from this guy who's Star Wars loving, wants to fly, to signing up to serve your country, to become a pilot, turned down. You finally get in by all kinds of measures and you make it happen. You get in, you change the kinds of planes you're flying, and now you're flying. There's a big jump there to when you and I met, when you were already a commander. You're already Fairchild, you were running that, and you were somewhere else before that, and then you went somewhere else again, I think, before you retired. So just sort of walk us through a short spell here. Was it ever a dream to command, or was that a natural sort of evolution for you? Because obviously not everybody gets there.
Oh, yeah, you're exactly right. Not everybody gets that opportunity to command a flying squadron or a base or anything like that. Early on, I had no idea that's what I would want to do. I think I knew in the back of my mind I wanted to stay for 20 years because 20 years would afford me a retirement.
Right.
And I just knew that if I could get to that threshold, I'd be happy. And that was the goal that I was going for. For most aviators, whether they're in the Navy or the Air Force, really your first 10 to 12 years are probably your prime flying years. I had accelerated all the way up to be an instructor pilot in both aircraft. And that's a lot of years of flying in each airplane to get to that level. But just like any officer in the Air Force, at some point you're going to get asked to lead because you're bred to be a leader, an officer, a leader of men and women in uniform and civilians that may be working within your organization. And it was about the 12-year point where I became the chief of a command post, which is like an emergency operations center. It's kind of the eyes and ears for the base. And I really started falling in love with leadership, like all the challenges of it. Not saying I was perfect at it. I made plenty of mistakes, but I think I love just the aspect of this machine, which is us, that you can also train, upskill. You can lean into areas that are uncomfortable. You can have great moments of success as well, but that you can be in this constant state of learning and get better and better and better, doing things I had no idea I'd ever be doing. And then before I knew it, I was working in the Pentagon for 2 years on helping to figure out the transition plan to end the war in Iraq in 2011. And then the next thing you know, I'm being asked to command a flying squadron up in New Hampshire. And I'm like, how did this happen?
Right.
Certainly performance obviously keeps someone on a promotion track. And I was doing very well and certainly met my gates or my requirements to command at the higher level. And the Air Force had enough confidence in me to promote me to major and then lieutenant colonel. and then be chosen to command a flying squadron. But I tell you, the toughest transition was going from lieutenant colonel, which was probably about the 16-year mark, to that 20-year point when I became a colonel. And I got promoted 2 years early, 2 years ahead of my peers to colonel, which, again, I wasn't expecting. I mean, I was awestruck by that. But you do tend to go, am I ready to be a deputy commander of an Air Force base or a commander of an Air Force base or lead at that level? Because I used to think back to when I was a lieutenant, well, those colonels were either really old men and women who looked gruff and, they didn't look anything like me. I have a baby face still, and now I'm about to become this colonel. It's a little intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be lying if I didn't say a little imposter syndrome does kind of flow in a little bit. Like,
of course.
Am I ready to do this? Well, my leadership obviously had enough confidence in me to say, yeah, we need you at these levels, just like they would anybody else that is my colleague at a similar location, maybe just a different base. But they said, yeah, the time is now. Let's see what you got. And by the time you and I met, I was the deputy commander of Fairchild Air Force Base.
Yep.
I was about a year and a couple months from moving on to Scot Air Force Base, where I became the base commander. But those 2 years that I spent at Fairchild were all in preparation for me to potentially lead my own Air Force base someday. And eventually that's what I ended up doing, which was a huge honor.
How long were you in before you became a commander?
So at Scot Air Force Base, I took command in 25 June 2019. So I was probably 22 years at that point.
22 years in. Okay. And then comes a diagnosis that changes everything. It seems like this path you're on was an evolution of a dream. The dream was originally, of course, to fly, but it became the evolution of that and to be the commander, etc.
Yeah.
And then comes the diagnosis. Walk us through that. Help us to understand how that came about.
At that point, I was still an active flyer, but my number one job was to be a vice commander at Fairchild Air Force Base, which is in Spokane, Washington, if people are wondering.
And by the way, there's a university that people don't believe is real. Go ahead.
Go Zags, right? Gonzaga University.
It's a real university that I know about, you know about. People are like, is that real? It really is. But it's right there.
It's absolutely right there. Yeah. So it was the wintertime of 2018, just before Christmas. And my wife and I were heading out to a Christmas party. And we visit the various unit Christmas parties just to kind of show goodwill for the holidays and stuff. And we're coming out of the base and not quite to the airport where I picked you up. And we were at a stoplight. And it was snowing that day. And I remember seeing headlights approaching me from behind in the rearview mirror. And you know it when somebody's moving a little bit too fast at night. My wife was texting somebody, but I was watching behind me and I could see these lights just disappear. And as soon as they disappeared, I knew we were going to get hit. And we got hit hard from behind. Ooh. And luckily, everybody was okay. I was able to pull the vehicle off. We go through that normal process of getting the insurance and that kind of stuff. And, we moved on. I had a little bit of a neck injury from that. And I knew that I wasn't going to get checked out that night. I felt good enough to go home. Like I didn't need to go to the hospital. And I said, I'm good. I'll check in with my doctors the following week because it was on a Friday night. Of course, it's Friday night. So Monday morning, I go to the flight docs and I tell them, hey, we got hit. I had a little bit of a sore neck. And he's like, let's send you off for x-rays. Let's just get an MRI just in case. Well, that MRI incidentally revealed a brain tumor. And this is what was funny about that situation was I was literally at a pre-op appointment with my wife because she was having a hip surgery. And I get a call from the flight doctor and I thought, well, he's just going to tell me some results. Nothing big. Maybe I got a little bit of a herniated disc or something. And he literally said, hey, do you know you have a brain tumor? And I'm like, no, is that bad?
Do you know you have a brain tumor? Like, I mean, that seems like a pretty ridiculous question.
At the time, I didn't think it was ridiculous, but when I think back, I'm like, yeah, that was a ridiculous question.
Do you know you have a hump on your back? No, I can't see it.
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, and anybody that's gone through any sort of head trauma immediately are surrounded with experts. And I know you know this from your accident. You're seeing neurology, neurosurgeons, in my case, oncologists, all kinds of specialists, and they basically form a tumor team of experts that kind of look at your case and take a look at everything. But here's the strangest thing is because we weren't aware of it and it wasn't affecting me, it was like, I didn't know how to react to it because yesterday I didn't know I had this, but today I have it. Am I supposed to walk differently now? Am I supposed to be careful about what I eat or maybe have one less Coca-Cola? All these things are running in my head, to include, are you going to die?
Yeah.
The one thing that did stop was my flying career. And that makes sense. When you find out you got something like that in your brain, they don't want to risk you in an airplane and something happens and you're risking other people's lives. I completely understand. I actually didn't really fight that. And the doctors were kind of shocked, because aviators don't like to not fly.
No, I understand.
But being 22 years in the Air Force at that point and my best flying years behind me, I kind of figured I'm okay with where I'm at right now. I really just want to live. I mean, that's number one goal.
How bizarre for anybody I'm completely normal, everything's cool. And then this quote accident, divine intervention, where a person rear ends you for you to get to know about something you would have no knowledge of because you were asymptomatic. There was nothing going on. And so, because you and I have had conversations about this, I didn't have an accident. I fell. And there's a difference. I am certain that I'm the manifestor of my own reality. I'm certain that that was I was supposed to have experienced in order to wake me up. And you were asymptomatic. Somebody had to ram you in the ass to give you a little bit of a jolt. And then you get this, we're almost at the end of part one here, and I'll get more into it in part two. But I just want to know, was there a moment there where you went, holy shit, thank God that happened? Was there any of that, or was that much later? Because for me, it wasn't until probably a year and a half later.
Yeah, I would say for me too, it was a little later. It wasn't right away. I was still a little bit mad at this kid that ran me from behind. But yeah, I think it was probably about it's funny you said a year. It was almost a year later where I was like, I'm not so mad about that car accident anymore.
Yeah.
You're right. I think there was some divine influence here that regardless of whether I knew it or not, and it wasn't affecting me, that was the right point in time to know about it.
Yeah.
And we could do something about it.
So we're going to come back to that. We'll talk about more about that and talk about how it changed your leadership and your approach to leadership and how you thought you were leading versus how you discovered you were leading. I want to talk more about that and how that's influenced you as you transitioned from military service into service. We'll talk more about that in part two of the show. Before we do that, though, Scott, I want to make sure that people know how to find out more about you, about your upcoming book, and about all of your services. So if you just tell people how they can find out more, that would be great.
My number one source is to go to my website, commandwithcourage.com. You'll find all the information you need to know about me and my services there as far as executive coaching and leadership development. And I love connecting with people on LinkedIn, so please hit me up there, reach out, let me know your story, and I'd love to be able to support you in any way I can.
Fantastic. We're going to be back in just one click with more of our delicious conversation with retired Commander J. Scot Heathman. We'll be back very soon, so stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.